bought items from these websites, and they received packages from China labeled as necklaces or toys, but inside the packages were machine gun conversion devices. Many of the seized weapons sold counterfeit goods. They also used gun manufacturer Glock's trademark when the switches were not produced by that company. The acting United States Attorney for the District of Massachusetts said seizing those domains is a critical step in disrupting the flow of dangerous contraband that threatens public safety. And 67 million people watched the first presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Trump. According to Nielsen data, the debate in Philadelphia aired across 17 televised television networks. The amount of viewers Tuesday night blew past the 51 million who watched the June debate between President Biden and Trump. However, this is a drop in total audience compared to 2020. That's when more than 73 million watched the first presidential debate between Biden and Trump. In 2016, a record 83 million tuned in to the first debate between Hillary Clinton and Trump. To reference, Nielsen's latest data doesn't account for the people who streamed and watched the debate on social media platforms. We're now just 53 days away from the U.S. presidential election. Many hopes were pinned on the debate earlier this week to hear more on policy from the nominees. The debate was an especially crucial opportunity for voters to learn more about Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee. She's still considered new to the race. Coming out of the debate, the criticism we're hearing of both nominees is that we didn't learn anything new from them in terms of policy. Many undecided voters are saying there's still a lot they need to know. Joining us now to discuss this and the nominees' policy proposals is political strategist Gerard Filitti. He's also a geopolitical analyst and attorney specializing in international law. Why do you think both Harris and former President Trump avoided stipulating specific policy positions during the debate, Gerard?
Well, it's really hard to tell. I think that both found it more convenient to debate one another on non-issues, on personality, trying to goad one another, making it about style, making it about the persona of the candidate rather than about substance. With Kamala Harris, the issue is that we don't really know how she's planning to pay for some of her policy ideas. And the second part of the problem is she has held contradictory positions for years. With Donald Trump, he has been very strong on a number of issues like the economy and immigration, but he too doesn't have a firm commitment to how he's going to implement some of these ideas.
Do you think that this is something moderators should press them harder on, or do you think the moderators pressed them enough?
I don't think the moderators were doing the best job that they could. They did certainly press Donald Trump a lot, not as much or not at all for Kamala Harris. But we also saw this in the CNN interview that Kamala Harris did. These candidates are not always answering the questions. And when prompted again and again by the moderators, they still don't answer the questions. I think really that's important for the American people to see that the candidates aren't answering. It's very difficult to get moderators to do that when the candidates themselves are unwilling.
Yeah, and that just seems to be a general trend in debates these days from what we've seen in the primary elections.
There's just copycat bot Trump.
In the debate between Joe Biden and Trump, but that really stood out as an oddity to me personally. From the campaign's perspectives, do you think there's been a change in strategic approach when it comes to debates from their point of view? Do you think it could be no longer advantageous to outline policy or commit to any presidential actions?
I think from what we have seen in the last 8 years of presidential politics is that it has become a race more of personality than substance. It's become an emotional appeal to people, to voters, than a pragmatic one with specific policy ideas. Don't get me wrong, the policies are important and they are outlined often by the candidates in policy papers. We see this both from the Trump and Harris camps. But when it comes to actual debates, it's about putting on a show. It's about showing the public that they should trust you to be president for the next 4 years. And that oftentimes is not about talking about specific agenda, but making themselves look good and competent, and more so than the other person. We don't really see the debates on specific policy proposals. We haven't seen that for a while, and we will not see that for the rest of this election cycle.
Now, the debate aside, there's still much we don't know in terms of detailed policy from former President Trump or Harris. I want to focus on foreign policy here in particular with us. Tell us, what know so far about their foreign policy positions?
The policy position of Donald Trump is easier to understand because he actually has been president. We expect that he will continue doing now as president what he did before, which is looking at our allies to bear a bigger burden, a bigger share of the burden for military defense, whether it's NATO or other treaties, looking to our partners to step up economically when there are international issues that require multi-country assistance, looking for our partners to take the lead in Europe, not always the United States. This is consistent with what he's done before. Also, a very strong support for Israel, standing against Iran, making sure that Iran does not develop a nuclear weapon. With Harris, we assume that a continuation of the Biden policies, but we don't know with certainty. And when it comes to Israel, there's certainly been equivocation because on the one hand, she says she is supportive of Israel and will provide them with weapons, but on the other hand, she surrounds herself with staff that does not like Israel and is fairly anti-Semitic. So there's a lot that we have left to see about how Harris will address global issues and whether she will go back to the negotiating table with Iran. And especially China, we don't know what her history is or what her stance is, other than that she wants to rein them in to some extent.
And with foreign policy in particular, there's always a place for some level of strategic ambiguity in terms of policy. Do you think this is playing into Trump and Harris's hesitancy to release specifics?
Well, I think the American public understands that when it comes to international affairs, you can't really be too specific because a lot of the things that the president deals with are reactive, are responses to a crisis. And you can give the world a good indication of what your principles are, what you're thinking, what you're guided by. But you can't always say you will deploy the following troops or you will respond with the following sanctions. So that's not realistic. But both candidates, what they're doing is essentially laying out their vision for what guides their decisions when it comes to foreign affairs.
Yeah, I would imagine they'd be thinking about that kind of risk. What do we still need to know from both Harris and Trump when it comes to their approach to, say, the Middle East, the Russia-Ukraine war?
But when it comes to the Middle East, there needs to be a pressure, especially on Harris, to provide specifics on how she intends to deal with Iran. That is the biggest threat in the region by far.
Same way they've been
Its
doing
proxies
all
have been
along.
aggressive and creating wars and terrorism
Bowing
for decades.
down.
Yet the Biden-Harris administration has been very lenient towards Iran, giving them billions of dollars in exchange for hostages and seemingly wanting to restart nuclear talks that were not favorable to the West. So those are things that Harris has to answer. On China, both candidates need to answer to the extent that political and economic pressure will be brought to bear to stop not just the expansion of China across the world, their military and social influence, but also to deal with things like the fentanyl crisis, which is very much fomented by China and affecting the U.S. Donald Trump has outlined sanctions, has outlined tariffs. We don't know how Kamala Harris will address China. These are important issues that need to be further refined.
Finally, Gerard, there's only 53 days until the election. Is there anything voters can do to get these campaigns to release more detailed policy or commitments before then?
Keep asking the questions, keep demanding answers. I think that the more that you have these candidates out there facing questions from the people, and the more that's video, the more we see the reluctance of either candidate to address the public and sit for press interviews, the more likely people are to think that these are not serious players. Donald Trump, to his credit, has had a lot of press conferences. He answers questions. Kamala Harris has not. So really, we need to see, especially Harris, sit down for interviews in which she actually answers questions. And the public can certainly demand that reporters and the media do a better job in holding them accountable to actually providing answers.
Yeah, there is indeed a significant contrast between these two candidates in terms of the number of press conferences. Political strategist Gerard Filitti, thank you again for your time. Good to see you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up.